Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Welcome back to the Contech On-Site podcast. Today, we're excited to host Matthew Kleiman. Matthew is an experienced entrepreneur, executive, investor, and author focused on bringing safety and sustainability to the construction industry. Currently, Matthew serves as a co-founder and CEO of Cumulus Digital Systems, an award-winning platform that ensures mission-critical work is done right the first time. With previous experience leading teams at Shell and Draper, Matt leverages his industry knowledge to build positive, lasting impact in the industry. Matt received a BA from Rutgers University, a JD from Duke University, and executive certificates in management and leadership from MIT Sloan School of Management. Super excited to have you on. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Hey, Eliyahu, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. It's a real pleasure. So just jumping right at it, you have a really interesting background. Could you tell us a bit about your background and how you got to your role today?
Yeah, sure. It is pretty non-traditional and winding, as many entrepreneurial journeys are. So today I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cumulus. Cumulus is a company we started in 2018 to solve the problem of quality in construction and operations. And I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of that in a few minutes. But just to step back and give a very brief overview of how I got here, I actually started out in the aerospace world, and I was working at an aerospace company called Draper in 2010, as you mentioned in the introduction. And that was the year of the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. And after that, a lot of the large energy companies started coming to aerospace companies like ours to learn how the aerospace world builds safety and reliability into large facilities operating in potentially dangerous environments, just like aircraft and spacecraft do. And the aerospace world has been doing that consistently and continuing to get better and better at it for the last 50 to 80 years. And the energy industry, it was clear, just hadn't kept up from a technological perspective. So eventually I was recruited by Shell to join them in 2012 to really start bringing in those capabilities from aerospace and other mission critical industries into energy to make energy facilities safer and more sustainable. And was doing that for 6 years, and we ended up really focusing on quality issues in both maintenance and construction, and eventually decided to leave Shell to start Cumulus in order to solve many of the problems we were dealing with every day.
Interesting. So that's really a diverse background. And you jumped into construction tech, and I mean, it's energy, but there's a lot of there's a ton of overlap. How was the move from big corporate into the startup world?
Well, it is very different. Going from being, in this case, I was representing the owner of large capital projects, in this case, Shell, and working on projects all over the world, in the US and Southeast Asia especially. And that is one perspective on the challenges you're having, especially around managing manual work in the field. Jumping into the startup world is a completely different perspective. While we're solving the same problem, we're coming at it as a technology provider, not as an owner. And you're just at a different place in the value chain. You have to interact with the different actors, whether it's the owners, the general contractors, the subs, the craft workers. You're just interacting with them in a very different, much more collaborative way than you do when you're taking the owner's perspective. And that was something the team and I had to learn and get much better at once we made that jump.
Super interesting. So every startup is meant to solve a problem, and every single company usually starts off with focusing on an industry-wide issue. What is the problem that you guys are trying to solve?
The problem we are solving is rework, which means it's work that has to be redone. It's unplanned because for some reason the work was not done properly the first time. And in the construction industry at large, more than 30% of work on job sites is rework. And this means that something goes wrong, either the plans weren't followed, somebody made a mistake, And that 30% ends up costing a lot, both in time, in money. There was a recent Autodesk study that pegged the cost of rework at almost $1 trillion a year industry-wide. It's estimated that rework increases the cost of a project by as much as 10% from the budgeted project cost. And more importantly, more than 1 million injuries and fatalities a year are traced back to rework. And the reason is a worker is about 70% more likely to be injured doing rework than they are doing planned work. And the reason for that is because it's unplanned, something has already gone wrong. And anybody who's been in critical industries knows that once something, that accidents are usually a cascade of failures, a cascade of problems. It's usually not just one thing. It's that something goes wrong, something else goes wrong, something else goes wrong. And once you're already in the rework situation, something has gone wrong, then you're reacting to that instead of acting in a proactive, planned manner. And that's why you get more injuries and a lot more costs. And not to mention the environmental impact, especially when you're working in the process industries and you have leaks and spills because of rework. So that was the big problem. That's the industry-wide perspective. And we were dealing with this every day as an owner, dealing with these rework rates. It was a problem that the industry typically just throws more paperwork, more process, more inspections, yet the numbers have not improved in decades. And what we saw as we started to look at this systematically is the cause of rework can usually be traced back to a lack of proper information or proper training. And what ends up happening is we put a lot of effort in construction into the planning, scheduling, budgeting, building our models, and we're also doing a lot to digitalize all of those activities. There's many great companies that, large and small, that are focusing on that area. We also focus a lot on completions, whether work has been completed. So this could be drone surveys, it could be other kinds of laser inspections, it could just be a completions turnover software with a checklist. We've put a ton of effort into that area. But what happens in the middle is that, and this is on projects not just in energy, but we see it in data centers and commercial construction and infrastructure across the industry, that work then goes out to the field. It's planned, it's managed digitally. It's then handed off and managed typically on paper, if managed in any system at all, where contractors and subcontractors now go out to do and execute the work that's planned. And then whatever they do has to come back into those completion systems. And it's in those handoffs from planning to execution, back to confirmation that the work was done right, because you're going from digital to analog back to digital, where things get lost, information is miscommunicated, people aren't trained properly, whatever the problem may be, that's where it happened. So we created Cumulus to fill that gap, and to fill that gap in execution, to make a system that seamlessly will manage work at that individual worker level, and then interface with both the planning and engineering management systems and the completion systems to make that seamless. And once you close that digital gap, you start to see those rework rates go down quite a bit, and we've seen great results, which we could talk about.
So to a certain extent, really, if I'm understanding correctly, a lot of the reworks are due to miscommunication or flawed communication or misunderstanding of what the assignments are on task.
Exactly. It's not as though we don't know how, from an engineering perspective, to build these types of facilities and structures. We know how to do it. In very rare instances are we truly doing something novel that has never been done before. But there's a ton of handoffs. There are a ton of different parties involved, and it's in that communication and in those handoffs where failures happen. And I'll give an example. One of the first times I came face to face with this problem from the owner's perspective, I was working on a project in South Korea, large construction project at a shipyard actually. And there were hundreds of work teams going around assembling about 100,000 bolted joints, bolted connections. This is a processing facility, so the piping was the central core of the system. And each of the teams that were going around assembling these bolted joints had 5 people on the team. There was the pipe fitter, there was the co-fitter who was carrying around all the documentation, and then there were 2 or 3 inspectors who were looking over the shoulder of those pipe fitters as they did their work. And it was incredibly inefficient. And despite all of those eyeballs, things were still going wrong. People had trouble finding where they were supposed to be, what the information was, where on the drawings they were supposed to be doing their work. It was just a terribly inefficient system, and it resulted in a lot of mistakes, that kind of work. And that's where we first kind of had this light bulb of saying, this is crazy. There has got to be a better way. Technology exists to help this kind of situation. You don't need to have all of these inspectors following all these workers around and still not having the right information that they need to do their job. We can do this a lot better. And that's where that light bulb went off of we got to figure out a way to make this better.
Super interesting. So I think you kind of already discussed a bit about how your solution's solving the problem, right? It's primarily communication, right? If I'm understanding you correctly.
So what we do, we have 3 steps that our system does. One, we make it very easy to get the detailed procedures that the workers are supposed to follow into our system. Now, typically, people either aren't doing this at all or doing this on paper or paper checklists. Some of the systems you have are these app builders, where you'll build a different app for every type of work that a worker might be doing in the field that's critical. And that's just, they're cumbersome to use, and they have to be bespoke and developed for every single company. We have this workflow builder that makes it very easy to bring these engineering procedures in. And actually, this is an area where we're even using new AI tools to make it even easier, where where customers can just copy and paste their existing procedures into the system, and our language models will just develop the workflows based on those copy and pasted in procedures. So now everybody's working off the same song sheet. And then we have an app that the workers will use in the field, and it will guide them step by step through whatever the procedure is and confirm that work was done properly. And then, depending on the type of work, our app will connect via Bluetooth to whatever type of tool or gauge the worker might be using to do their work. So in the bolt to join example, there are probably about 2 or 3 dozen different torque wrenches that now have connectivity on the market today. And we can connect with in order to validate that the worker who did the work, how long it took them to do it, and that the bolts were tightened properly. Same things with pressure testing, with welding, all kinds of work activities. You can now get digital information right from the tools the workers are using. We bring that into the system, and then that goes into our dashboard, where we have analytics that we show our customers, who are typically the project managers, construction managers, maintenance managers at facilities, what it is in real time that the workers did in the field. And when there is a problem, it's flagged immediately for someone to deal with. But as much as the tools and the connectivity is important, it's really just having everybody agree on the procedures and have visibility into the procedures, and that those procedures were followed, that makes the most difference. And we've gotten rework rates down to next to 0 on our projects. Just one thing we published last year with one of our customers is we were able to show that rework rates on a particular project went from over 10% to 0.1% once they started using our system. And it's really, the main reason is that transparency, the accountability that the system brings.
Who is, I'd say, the classic, I guess, client or target that's the solution's like the best fit for?
So the typical buyer of our system is either going to be the owner or the general contractor. That's typically who feels the most pain from rework financially, not to mention the safety issues, but just financially. When there is rework on a project, it's the owner and the GC who feels it the most. But the users of the system are everybody on the job site. So when we come in, it's not just a planner or a manager who's using the system, but everybody down from the project manager down to the individual worker in the field is on the system. But the people who are buying it are the owners and GCs.
So first of all, I mean, I think it's really exciting. There's actually a theory that I really like. It's called the Tower of Babylon theory.
Okay.
And the Tower of Babylon theory is I mean, there's a biblical reference, a story about these people who get together and build this really tall tower. And kind of
Mhm.
within themselves, it was a time that the entire world spoke one language. That's how it's described in the Bible. And one of the things is they were planning, they had this mission, they're going to build a tower tall enough to fight an almighty power, right?
Mhm.
And so God's looking down at these people, and he decides that rather than I don't know, kill everybody or break the tower, he's going to pull a trick on them. And the trick that he pulled is he made everybody misunderstand each other. And the concept or the application of it in regular business life is, the theory says, is the larger you become as an organization, or the greater the project you're trying to do, the greater the barriers of communication become. And so
Yep.
it's kind of like this instilled aspect in reality, whether it, I mean, religious stories aside, I feel like the concept's very applicable.
Yep.
And so it's amazing you were saying, because rework, I think a lot of people look at it from an angle of maybe either something that's inherent to the construction industry because there's a lot of changes,
Yep.
or people are looking at it from a lot of different ways. So it's actually really interesting that you're coming at it from more of a
Example to the Tower of Babylon story, because I think it's so applicable. And whether you believe it's literal or figurative, somebody at some point in history had this problem and incorporated it into a story. And so this is not new by any means. This is a problem that has been affecting large human endeavors since the dawn of time. And now we could use technology to help with it. I think in the modern industry, the problem is getting worse with the labor issues that a lot of the industry is facing, because it used to be that you'd have workers that were working with the same companies in the same region for decades, and you'd build a certain amount of trust, a certain amount of experience. You have apprenticeship programs. And with the labor shortage, with the retirement of a lot of the more experienced workers, you're bringing in a lot more either transient or inexperienced workers onto these job sites. And so whatever issues we used to have around the Babel problem 10, 20 years ago are only getting worse. And it's only more important to solve them today.
I think it is. I think when you're looking at these mega projects, there's some companies that are in the MEP space that we consult, and one of the biggest issues is obviously, human resources. It's one of the biggest challenges. And you're looking around, people are coming from everywhere across the world. It's like culturally they're misaligned. Language-wise they don't understand. They're coming from different backgrounds. Some of them have more experience, less experience. Probably, I mean, everyone is looking for people who have experience maybe working with some of the bigger oil companies, but at the same time, it's different. It's inherently, it's quite different. So the barriers of communication are really high. So I also find, what you guys are doing very inspiring. And I also, it's interesting because what I love really talking about tech companies is that everyone comes from a different angle. And the communication angle, I didn't expect you to say you're trying to solve reworks. And I was expecting a different answer, but I really, but I really like it. And it's very interesting to hear how reworks has like such a big impact. I mean, the numbers you were talking about were pretty substantial.
And these aren't our marketing numbers. These are studies done by folks like FMI and other organizations that have looked at this almost academically into understanding these costs. And you're absolutely right. A lot of people just think about rework as the cost of doing business, and they build it into their budgets. They build it into their plans, like, oh, this is going to happen, so we have to plan for it. And then it usually ends up being worse than they expect. And that's why you get projects behind schedule and over budget. One of the reasons you get that. And we just looked at it, and our perspective is this isn't something we as an industry have to tolerate. And to the extent we could make a big impact on it, it just makes these large projects, which are so critical in rebuilding our infrastructure, that much more affordable and that much more doable.
Okay, so we're heading on to another question.
Yeah.
We all know that the construction industry is slow to adopt technology. What market barriers have you encountered until now, and how have you overcome them, or how are you trying to overcome them?
That's absolutely true. That it's a conservative industry, and despite the fact that I think the industry is a lot more open to new technology today than it was when I first entered it over a decade ago, it's still in its early nascent stages. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have in the industry is that structurally, construction companies are not set up to to evaluate and bring in, select and procure new technology. In other industries where you're selling, for instance, to IT departments, they have a whole system. They're incredibly experienced at buying new cybersecurity software, for example, or cloud management software, whatever it might be. And so there's a process, and everybody's speaking the same language generally. The economics are understood, and you go through and you could say, well, I have a better system and it's going to save you money or save you time or perform better, whatever your value proposition is. And that's clear. And you either win the customer over or you don't. What we have experienced in construction is that getting the buy decision for your primary stakeholder is just the first step, because then they have to figure out how to bring, from a budget and process perspective, bring your technology into the company. And that often is not a clear, well understood process. For example, most of the budgets are dispersed down to the project level. So a project could decide to buy a new system, but that impacts the project's P&L and means you're relying on the project teams. And then once the project's over, it's done. It's very difficult to go from the project level with a lot of customers to a more centralized procurement system, which often just doesn't exist or has to be set up for the first time. And that ends up being one of the biggest challenges. It's not getting to the buy decision, it's actually executing that buy decision once you get there. And then the other big issue is the perception of risk. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes, especially in legacy industries, doing anything new is perceived as risky to someone's career because they get a job and the person before them may have had rework, may have had other issues, but it was just the cost of doing business. And as long as they do their job the same way the last person did their job, then nobody, they're going to advance their career as long, regardless of what happens. But if they decide to try something new, like a new technology, that's risk, because then if something goes wrong, that's when people have real impact on their careers, not to mention the financial and safety costs. And so we have to overcome that perception of risk of doing something new. Now, sometimes you can do it by finding the person who's inclined to want to try new things, someone who understands the problems with the status quo. Otherwise, it's getting your technology in their hands in a low risk way where they can try it out, get comfortable with it, show it to their colleagues and say, wouldn't this make our life so much easier? Wouldn't this save us a lot of time, a lot of money? Wouldn't this make it safer? Whatever the value proposition is, wouldn't this be a better way of doing it? If it's easy for them to do that, to try it, to experience it, to understand it, then they can overcome that concern about career risk and get everybody on board pretty quickly. But it's overcoming that perception that perception of risk that's one of the biggest challenges in the industry.
So if I'm really trying to see if I understood what you're saying, it's really there's a conservative mindset that really is kind of, maybe a lot of people look at it as let's say Rework just being part of doing business, right? And or maybe that they just end up looking at in terms of perceptions, it's going to be a risk. We've been doing it this way. We don't know, if we go down this route, we don't know what the outcome is. Over here, we know the outcome is going to be 10% rework max, right? Over here, we know that we're going to be paying some money up front or for a solution. We don't know how much it's going to be beneficial. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. And it's not really about price or anything like that. You could give your system away for free and you still have to overcome that perception of risk. So some of the ways you do it, as I mentioned, is make it easy for them to try it out, to understand what it's like. Obviously, we do all kinds of things with case studies and customer testimonials and publishing the successes that other customers have had. But we have found that until you're able to get your system in somebody's hands and they could understand it, touch it, feel it, and really understand that, no, this is a good thing and this is going to make things better, it's very hard to overcome that risk aversion without doing that.
something that I see a lot and get a lot from other tech companies, while talking to the construction companies, is there's a certain like an awareness challenge in terms of how big the problem is. A lot of them are just like you said, like, in terms of they're used to just being just part of the way of doing business. And when you're coming up and saying, hey, by the way, do you know that reworks are causing X, Y, and Z? And there's a certain concept of being unaware of how big the problem is, how much it's actually costing. It's kind of been shoved in between the operational expenses, right? Yep. And bringing that 100%. Out is like, bringing that stuff out is I think alarming and concerning to some of the people who have actually been managing this area of responsibility for a long time. So there's even the pushback. There's a certain extent of, it's one thing that you've been you waking up the dead, and the other thing is you've actually waken up the people who are like, oh, I've been responsible. What happens if I'm accused or end up being responsible for it? And so I think that a lot of the times where I see a little bit more success, and it's just like on a broader scale, is when you're actually tapping into, I don't know, it's the people like tend to call the champions, or the people that are hurting the most, right, within the industry. And they're the people who actually want to solve a problem, not necessarily the people who are responsible for the issue, but people want to solve it. What's your opinion on that?
I think you hit a nail on the head. You convincing people that there is a problem is often the first challenge. I mean, we go to so many prospects and hear we don't have that problem here. It's not a problem for us. We've gotten better at educating and getting around that. And I also think the industry at large is becoming more open to understanding the challenges that it's having. But yes, acknowledging that there is a problem is the first step in the adoption process. The second piece is absolutely, sometimes once you acknowledge a problem, it's, well, who's responsible for it today? And I've seen a lot of other startups that are very focused on either worker safety or quality management run into huge roadblocks. And we get some of that too, where the quality or safety managers, they get very defensive and they say, no, we not only we don't have that problem, but we're actually great at solving it, because they're saying they're great at solving it. And it becomes very political very fast, and you really hit a roadblock there. So it's absolutely something you have to navigate and a challenge. We haven't found a magic bullet yet for overcoming it. I think the best thing you can do is present your value proposition in a way that doesn't personally call anybody out, but also find the people who actually have the pain, not the people who have the job title of solving that problem.
So I think one of the things that are very unique about you also is your corporate background. Also working in Shell and also kind of getting, I think that maybe it gave you one of the opportunities, started with a problem that you actually felt and saw from inside that actually exists, but how does that impact the way that you maybe approach your solution, or how's that, does it have, question number one, does it have an impact? And two, if so, how is that expressed?
It definitely has an impact, certainly in the very early days of the company, of being able to, one, having incredible empathy for our end user, because we were solving a problem where we were the end users. So we had empathy there. We did have to be careful not to have myopia in terms of thinking that everybody looked at the world the exact same way we do. So we had to understand how other owners and contractors thought about this. But it gave us instant credibility coming into the room with somebody and saying, hey, we were you before, and we know we had this problem. And that instant credibility often broke down that defensiveness that we talked about a few minutes ago, of not even acknowledging that they had a problem, because we get over it. It would be, yeah, I was you. I had your same job or a similar job in my company, and we had this problem. Oh yeah, well, we have this problem too. Then people, their barriers come down, and they're ready to empathize and talk about it. And it kind of as if you're at the bar at the end of the day, just exchanging war stories. So that was one piece of it. Two, I don't think it would have been very difficult to discover the problem we're solving and have that communication angle that you said sounded pretty unique to you, if we weren't living with the problem ourselves. If we came at it from from more distance, where we, had read about the rework problem and said, oh, we're going to figure out a way to solve it, it'd be a much blander solution that probably wouldn't actually solve the real problems. And I saw this when I was inside of Shell. We have a lot of companies, a lot of startups come to us to try to sell different technology. And it was fundamentally something like, give us all your data and we are going to create value from it through some algorithm we have or some special analytics. And our problem is we didn't have any data. It existed maybe in spreadsheets or in people's head or in binders, and you just couldn't do that. So you had to solve for that first before you even start applying other technology, especially people coming out of the tech world. There's a lot of learning to walk that the industry has to do before it could start running. And you have to approach problems. A philosophy that we always have is with the least necessary technology to accomplish whatever the business objective is. Because if you come at it as a technology looking for a solution, you're going to have a very hard time getting traction. You're not going to generate real value. If you try to do too much technology, even if it's the hot, sexy thing in Silicon Valley, then you're just not going to get adoption because the industry just isn't as far along as some other industries are in being ready to adopt and implement technologies for all kinds of reasons. You try to give somebody an AR headset and say, go in the field and these are going to give you your work instructions, and you're going to get laughed off the job site, not to mention issues you might have with connectivity or explosive materials in the atmosphere where you can't use electronics, all kinds of reasons that make doing something like an AR headset completely impractical in this use case. People might not understand that if they don't come into it as somebody who's actually lived in this industry before. And I think the best startups, the best technologies that are getting the most adoption are built, at least in part, by people who are solving problems that they experience themselves, not problems that they read about or heard about.
I really couldn't agree more. I think that there are a lot of innovators from different industries that are able to get in and actually produce some good technology. But I think that their number one quality is probably that they're very good listeners and they listen. Yes. They listen to the problem and they try reiterating and refiguring out the product until they get there. And I also love the fact that you're talking about data. And not long ago we wrote an article about the data economy, and it's just like, when you're looking at the data economy worldwide, you're looking at what Google did, Amazon's doing to e-commerce, Meta's doing to our, to social. It's like the construction industry is just so far behind on utilizing any of its real data. And a lot of the tech companies, if they're coming, their primary, I think one of the greatest values is going to start helping aggregate data that is relevant, to the companies and in ways that make sense. Yeah.
Exactly. There was a stat I read recently. I'm gonna get this wrong, but it was something like less than 5% of data that's generated on a job site is actually used in any way by construction companies. It was some surprisingly small number, and until we make this data more easily accessible to non-experts, doing some of the more advanced things are just out of the question. And you can get huge gains in productivity, in quality, in safety with fairly incremental approaches. And that's why, going back to that philosophy we have of the least amount of technology required to accomplish whatever your business objective is. Because don't think you have to do rocket science in order to solve some of these big problems. It's really smaller steps can get you a very long way. A lot of construction contractors and owners I've found have been burned by technology before that had all kinds of promises. And as a newer entrant, you have to overcome a lot of this skepticism. And that's something we didn't talk about when we talked about barriers to entry, is just how many failed promises there were in past technology cycles. And now you're going to see that with AI. And everybody wants to do AI now, including us, and we've done some really interesting stuff with it. But there's going to be a lot of skepticism of people who thought They're still wondering where their blockchain enabled smart contracts are that was going to make all their payment problems disappear. And they say, oh, here's AI, here's the next thing. Well, this is different, but you have to prove it and be ready to prove it.
I mean, there's a lot more to unpack here. Maybe one of the things that's just itching me so much is I'll also pick your brain on it. But I love what you said, learning to walk right before starting to run. And there is a certain, I wrote an article a while back that was called Teaching Giants How to Crawl. And the concept was, construction companies are these massive behemoth corporates that managed to build some of the most fascinating structures in the world. When it comes to construction, these guys are giants. When it comes to technology adoption, they've never done it before. They're babies. They don't even know how to, they're not even crawling yet. They're just like, you're trying to teach a giant, really how to crawl. And there's a sense of confidence. Like I was sitting down with one of the largest holding groups, I'd say in the Middle East last week. And while talking to them, right, they wanted, we presented a solution, but they didn't want the solution as they didn't want the basic. We want the most advanced part of your solution. And what's funny is you're thinking about it and saying like, listen, man, if you really, you just really have to walk, before you could run. But there's such a, I would say that it comes a little bit, and I'm saying this on the positive side, it really comes, I think, from this standard of trying to achieve excellence. That's what I see it, perfectionism. But at the same time, you haven't adopted any significant technology across your systems, and just applying it in one project is hell on earth. Trying to roll it out is going to be, I don't know what, seven gates of hell you have to pass through, and we have this issue a lot with companies because we sit down with them and we're trying to figure out, what technology could be relevant for you to adopt, how you should adopt it, what's your first project to use. We sit down with companies, we talk to them about it, and it just, like, I think it's one of the biggest discrepancies because they won't move forward until they feel that they're getting the best project, and then they end up paying 3 times more than what they actually need for all the features they're not going to use for another 3 years. So what do you think?
Completely agree. It's we find that because I think you hit it on the head. They're used to excellence. They're used to accomplishing really big things, and they're not intimidated by really big things. So when they see technology that they like, they want it to be perfect. They want it to be, okay, if we're going to do this, it is going to have every bell and whistle, and it is going to match our systems exactly. Well, that kind of bespoke technology, as you mentioned, is incredibly expensive. And then it becomes a price discussion. And whereas you could tell them, look, just start small, even if it's not perfect, even if it's an 80% solution. Just start using it, start building the reps, start building those muscles of how to successfully implement new technology, make it systematic. And that's a big challenge that we see is that, technology is exciting. And I'm a technologist, we're all technologists. We all get excited by the cutting edge. But what a big difference, coming from aerospace into construction, a big difference is in the aerospace world, we've adopted this concept called systems engineering, systems thinking, which is how to view whether it's a facility or a project or an aircraft as almost a living being that's completely interconnected with each other. That if you make a change in one area, it's going to have second, third, and fourth order effects in all those other areas. And so you have to learn how to think about your own project or your own company as a living, breathing, interconnected system, not a bunch of individual silos where you can which is how construction and large industrial companies often think about themselves. So bringing in that systems thinking, it was a big part of the work we did as Shell into construction. And that's how you start to think about those handoffs between planning and execution in the field and completions, by thinking about those all as systems. And we really encourage our customers and other executives we talk to begin using those systems thinking principles and begin learning it and understanding it when you're thinking about improving your business. We obviously have a technology bent to it, but it can really be for anything. In everything is interconnected, and whenever you make a change, whether it's a new technology, a new procedure, a new training program, whatever it is, you really need to understand those second, third, and fourth order effects to make the best decision and then have the highest chance of success with implementation. And that's something we end up talking about a lot and educating our customers on. And the success metrics bear that out in that people who do start thinking that way have much higher success rates with new technologies in anticipating the barriers and in understanding and having realistic expectations of the value.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I really want to continue, but I know that we're coming to we're having to wrap up.
This is a great discussion.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it a lot. I'm really enjoying it. And there's so much more. There's so much more to unpack. I'm going to stay disciplined. I'll try to
We'll just have to do it. We'll just have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, let's do it again. So there's just a few more. These are kind of icebreaker questions, more or less. That's the goal. That's the goal of this one. What is the funniest work nickname you ever got?
Oh my gosh, the funniest work nickname I ever got that's appropriate to share on a family program. Well, so you mentioned I had a JD from Duke University. I only practiced as a lawyer for a couple of years before going into the business, commercial, and technology side. But usually it has to do with me being a lawyer by background and various epitaphs around that, especially on job sites, and being, the lawyer, even though I haven't practiced as a lawyer in 15 years.
Okay. Oh, so as the lawyer, is that the nickname?
Yeah, I don't remember. I have to think about what the specifics are, but I just know that that is usually the brunt. That's how I become the brunt of a joke. If I was a fighter pilot, that would be my call sign would have something to do with that.
Okay, awesome. What's your preferred platform of communication when it comes to work? Emails, LinkedIn, WhatsApp?
Yeah, I'm on all the above. I am pretty active on LinkedIn. That's a really good way to reach out to me. I'm a avid texter with people. It's probably my day-to-day how I communicate with when I'm not talking to people in person is through text, or whether it's WhatsApp or iMessage. And then we use Slack in the company to communicate with each other. We're pretty distributed. But LinkedIn, from someone trying to reach out to me for the first time, I'll just say, my email is very easy. It's Matt with 2 T's at cumulusds.com. So people should feel free to email me. But LinkedIn is a place I'm fairly active and easy to get a hold of.
Okay, awesome. And is there a comfort food that you like to have after a long day of work?
So from a dessert perspective, key lime pie is probably my favorite. I am a sucker. If that's on the dessert menu, I am probably ordering it, no matter how much my willpower tries to overcome. But I also love sushi, and will always choose that if I have a choice.
Okay. Is there any funny situation you could recall that you encountered in a construction project?
Funny situation. Oh man, I'll have to think about it. I can't say. Yeah, not one I'd want to. It becomes unfunny if I generalize it too much, and so there certainly are, but it normally involves someone doing something really dumb, and or myself doing something really dumb. And not going to get into the details of that without really thinking how to sanitize it, but still keep it funny.
Okay, cool. I think we're good.
Okay, so great.
Matt, I want to thank you so much for getting on the podcast. It was a blast, super insightful. I think there's a lot of information and insights that a lot of people here could really benefit from. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me, Eliyahu. This was a great discussion, and I hope it was useful for people. So this was great. Thank you. Okay, guys, comment, like, share, ask any questions you want in the comments section. Hopefully me and Matt will have an opportunity to answer them. And yeah, we'll put some of your contact details so that people could reach out to you. Don't spam him, guys. Don't spam him. Yeah. So, but thank you so much for taking this. Yeah. All right. My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.